Let me just check the time. It is afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chris Catherabel. I'm from Monash University, Deputy Director, International Research Partnerships and Programs. And I'm here with Grant Walton from ANU, Farida from Fred Hollows Foundation. Oh, sorry, Maria from Fred Hollows Foundation, and Farida from
Asai.
Thank you. And we're going to talk about evidence and learning in development. Hopefully, some of you attended the previous session, a few rooms over, on doing development differently. This sort of follows up on that, and we're looking at evidence and learning in development in sort of how we can do that differently when we think about decolonisation, localisation, and all the sort of topical issues that we're here discussing in this conference and exchange. And so we'll start with a bit of a discussion and some questions, and then we'll break out into sort of groups and have some more discussions and questions. And then we'll come back together as a community here and open up for questions from everyone and for. So I'll start with Farida, if you'd like.
I'm just interested, people joining us today, who joined the online discussion? How long ago was it? A month or two ago?
It's April.
In April. Did anyone join that? Okay, we've got one person. Nobody else, huh? I wonder if you can share with us anything that came to mind from that time. So we were going to recap a little bit. So I'm just going to ask. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Look, for me is that I think that we all know there's different ways of doing evaluations and there's different ways of learning and knowing, but that the systems, and maybe I don't know whether it comes from the top, from the donors, still push us into areas where, because maybe we can't apply what we know we should be doing differently. And I think it takes some more considerable, labor to get that to shift. And I think that has to do with compliance. And I mean, a lot of what I think this morning panel reminded us of why I think things need to shift in the aid system, right? Is because in many ways, there's a lot of talking the talk, but walking the walk is much, much harder, because the people then you talk to at that level particularly are the ones that probably haven't quite reached the talk yet. And that's often, I see it as up, particularly local organizations, up against that so strong. It's all about compliance, it's about lacking trust of different knowledges, etc. So I think for me, it was like that we maybe didn't reach a conclusion other than that we know where the problem is. So I hope that wasn't okay.
That's
takeaway.
Beautiful. You give me a second. I have a little summary, so you set the stage.
Sorry.
And I can.
That's perfect.
You did it.
Yeah. So you go ahead.
I'll do. Yeah. Got a little thing. So absolutely, in April of 2025, this year, we had the opportunity to come together, the RDI network, and to speak about and development. Oh, wait, actually, no, it was who was our partners at the forum? Diplomacy.
Back.
Oh, what was it? I'm drawing a blank.
Liz Jackson from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we will come with the name, but we worked together to come up with a kind of closed sector forum on making evidence and learning count. And part of what was discussed absolutely was that evidence, defining evidence to include research-based, practice-informed, and lived experiences. Like the lived experience is one of the things that many shared both as a challenge and opportunity. How do we begin to transform evidence generation and evidence by speaking more to the kind of realities happening online? For evidence to be truly used, a culture of curiosity, which has come up a lot in cockatoos, and accountability is essential alongside ensuring its relevance, right? So relevance meaning asking questions that generally matter to the communities and to the countries where programs are being implemented, and ensuring that the evidence can inform meaningful change. So crucially, the forum delved into power dynamics. Evidence is not neutral, and a focus on Western standards creates a power imbalance, making it vital to consider what a locally led approach would look like. So the insights from that forum, from our previous forum, underscores the need to move beyond these extractive approaches, prioritize local voices, and navigate inherent tensions. And I think navigate is an important thing. I know sometimes it's so frustrating. We want to kind of obliterate the tensions that exist, right? But navigating them is actually a practice and an exercise that we all need to get a little more comfortable with. What kind of alliances are needed and how to navigate these complex dynamics is what we're here today to talk about. So thank you. So that sets the stage for why we thought, why would this space here at the RDI Exchange 2025, with all of you and the diversity, the interdisciplinary kind of representations that you all have, would be the space to kind of progress such a conversation. So saying that, so that's the stage. Farida, would you like to kind of set us up?
Sure. Yeah, and I think we've got, could you pass me that? I think we have, oh, right, yeah. So this will, we want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation for this place that we're standing on, and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And we just want to give you, I think Chris outlined the flow of everything. And these are the 4 questions that we'd like to explore together. So we're going to kick off by discussing these 4 questions a little amongst ourselves, and then we'll break us up so that you can go more into depth. We want to start with the first one, talking a little each about the first one, and then each of us will lead on the following questions. So the first question that we have is, what does it mean to build and sustain ethical embedded learning ecosystems in practice? And I'm happy to kick off with some of my thoughts and reflections here on this question. And I think part of what came up this morning is, if we think of ourselves as part of a broader process of social change, sometimes in development you can become projectized, and projects are super useful for providing resources, but they're also time-bound entities that can be separated from the people and the processes who are progressing this change over the longer term. And I think if we as practitioners remember that we're connecting into the people and the processes that are doing this over the longer term, that really helps us in ensuring that we're part of that broader ecosystem. And part of that, I think, is really understanding what our role becomes then. What's our role? What's our position in this change process? And where is it that I'm an insider and where is it that I'm an outsider? And what are both the strengths and the weaknesses of that role? I think Grant will helpfully kind of take us through, especially in question 4, some of the important advantages that external perspective can sometimes play, especially when it comes to saying dangerous things that some people internally may not be able to say. But there are also limitations in terms of scope of understanding of issues or close understanding of relationships. So really understanding where we stand within that ecosystem is part of making sure we're acting ethically and we're supporting the ecosystem over the broader long term. I think some of the processes to make this practical are around checking in regularly with other people in that process. So if you're part of a project or social, let's say you're working within the gender equality space and there's annual get-togethers of the women's organisations, then those are places where you can be checking in about how things are going. Having, we've got nature coming in to say hello, which is nice. Having processes for how you manage yourselves as a group and then reflecting and changing as needed. So those are some of the practical things that I'd point out for question 1. Would you like to take from there, Grant?
Yeah, sure. Look, thanks everybody for coming along. So I work at ANU, I work for the Development Policy Centre and for the Policy and Governance department within the Crawford School. And so my work, I work in these kind of dual roles. On the one hand, I'm a bit of an insider, so I work and partner with non-government organisations and donors and others to ask normative questions about policy and practice, what works, what doesn't. So, for example, I recently did some work with WaterAid and World Vision in Papua New Guinea, looking at the work that they were doing in districts in PNG, mapping out the way in which decisions were made at the district level, at the national level, and looking at who were connected and who were marginalised from those processes about water management and WASH in particular. We designed the research questions with our partners and local researchers. We did the field work in different ways together, helped to work together on the report findings, and the findings themselves were internalised by World Vision and WaterAid. They used their networks to reach out to partners in the national level, the subnational level, to get feedback on the initial findings and to shape policy and practice. So that's the first kind of part of my roles, right? So it's really about the normative questions. But there's a second, and that role is really now increasingly in demand in universities that are cash-strapped, particularly at ANU, where at the moment there's significant change going on. So universities are looking for development partners to answer those normative questions. But of course, the role of researchers, roles of academics have got a secondary role, and that is to critique the processes of change, local, national, regional, international processes of change, and to, as was presented very well this morning, the broader discourses of development. In my case, I'm interested in corruption and anti-corruption narratives and responses. So what I think is happening with the squeezing of funding for the development sector is that those researchers and scholars within the Asia-Pacific region, particularly in areas that I work in Papua New Guinea and some of my colleagues in other areas, it's more difficult. It's becoming more difficult for them to play the role of the critic. There's less funding available, there's less solidarity. The demise of USAID may be celebrated in some areas, but for others, it was a kind of a lifeline to a transnational network of scholars, researchers, and others that could help local researchers write about very difficult topics like corruption. And so I think that part of the role in these countries that I've been working on in the Asia Pacific is in particular being squeezed with recent funding cuts, geopolitical changes, and other changes. And I'll talk a little bit more about those a little bit later on, but I'll hand it over to Yadira.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yadira Perez, and I'm the head of operational research at the Fred Hollows Foundation. I did want to know, actually, we have another panelist who's a facilitator online, Dr. Media Rangi, who's hybrid with our other online participants. So thank you for those who have joined online as well. Oh, you can see us. Oh, there she goes. Yeah. Say hi. Wonderful. So when I came to this question about thinking about what exactly does it look like to sustain ethical evidence learning ecosystems, I began to think about the work I've done at the Fred Hollows Foundation. So I've been 7 years there leading our technical advisory services in research for over 25 countries, including our Indigenous Australia program, and thinking about what technical services are needed in the multiple different places where we work. So 25 countries, we work with hundreds of different implementing partners and a mind-boggling diversity of communities around the world. So in my role particularly, one of the first things was trying to figure out where do we situate where the need for research is. Is the need within the country, at the nation state? Is it at the country? At the community, at the regional state? Is it at the organizational level when we're thinking of our organizational strategy? And in the beginning, this first 7 years, our research was guided by our organizational strategy. And then we entered in conversation with our partners on the ground, right? And then we worked with consultants on the ground to kind of figure out what, how, and what's the best ethical way in which to proceed with the research. Thankfully, in the years, maybe in the last 3 to 4 years, we have developed a really strong country strategy development process that actually, so from our organizational strategy, all our countries, 25 different countries around the world, take the time with their own implementing partners to develop what as a country are the eye health needs, what are the 5-year plans for eye health in that country. That country strategy gets developed, and now the research comes out of that. Right. It's taken a while to kind of flip that. It actually the change had to happen outside of research. It happened within the development kind of community. And then we as researchers kind of began to understand what our research strategy within that was. Now to take a step further, when we think about sustainable ecosystems, there needs to be a move where even the technical advisory services are not situated globally. And there is where we begin. As in my role, one of the things I focused on, and my team has focused on in the last 2 to 3 years, is making transparent what ethics means to us, making transparent what's quality, and actually within our organization, beginning to embed those definitions of quality that are centered around community-focused research and evidence generation. So quality no longer is just having the right experts, the right methodology, but thinking about who is doing the research, thinking about who's asking the research, and for us as an organization, holding ourselves accountable on a kind of research rubric, right, of quality that isn't coming from the global center. There is ways to go in terms of understanding how this could be sustained and how we can move kind of those, not only those scholars and expertise locally, which we've always used, but again, that technical advising so that the support that's needed for the evidence generation is happening closer to home, the expertise is closer to home, and that we as an organization also begin to think about what funding mechanisms are needed so that those technical advising services that are not just supporting one project, but a country strategy can be better funded, supported, and that they then, as technical advisories, are then beginning to build the capabilities portfolio. What do they need and what do we need as partners in the game to make sure that the resources, the capabilities, the skills, the practices are at place for future work.
I'm just reflecting on the different positions that we each take. So it's interesting to hear Grant talking from a kind of university, you know, much more independent from the implementation process, for example. Yadira talking from the perspective of an organization across 25 countries, and myself speaking as an evaluator involved in evidence generation more at a project level. So I think having these different perspectives is useful. Yeah. Yes, please.
I might just ask a question for all of you, just because of those different perspectives. And we spoke briefly before about navigating inherent tensions, but donor expectations, community expectations, integrity in evidence gathering and learning and development and putting that back into practice, and even being independent despite having to work with communities and donors as well. How do you navigate that?
I mean, I might start from my perspective, and it also speaks to that second question there about kind of elevating local voices and decentering extractive processes, because I think that's part of what's important in terms of integrity of the evidence. But I think when we use those phrases, we have to think a lot about them. When we say local voices, what does that term local mean exactly? So a singular term can be very flattening, as if there's just one voice that represents locality. But of course, we know the many different positions people take, different perspectives they have while they're there. So that's part of thinking through who within the community are we working with to elevate their voices. And to the second point around extraction, you know, what is it that we're using the information for? How clear is that to people beforehand? So this comes back to the tension you're talking about. If you're working for a donor, there is something that you're needing to provide to the donor in relation to information, but how much do people know that before you engage with them? How much of the information goes back to them in a way that's useful to them? And therefore, those are the two parts that kind of make for ethical practice, I think. Yadira, is there anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I was thinking, I think the transparency, right? It's absolutely critical. So part of what it looks like working in all these different settings is that for me, making your rubrics transparent. What does what does quality look like? What does ethics mean to you? And then having that as a starting point, not an end point in terms of working with different communities. So if this is what quality means to us, let's begin to have a conversation about what does that mean for you? What does that, you know, when we enter into questions about research needs, we're looking at these larger kind of country strategies and national plans, iHealth plans, right? But for the community themselves, what's your engagement with this question? And when it comes to the data themselves, what access and what information, you know, what's the output you want out of this? So for me, the reason why transparency about what's the rubric going to be defined as is so important at the beginning. It's because it then leads to really clear, hopefully really important conversations about roles and responsibilities, about accountability that's both ways. And then hopefully from those really tough conversations and an accountability, clarity about where the research project team lies, what the country needs are, how do the country, what the community needs are as well, and what ways do they need the research and the evidence in order for it to actually be used in programming or advocacy. Then there, I believe, is where actually some of that deeper magic can happen, right? I think without that governance and framework, it's really, you kind of begin to continue to kind of operate in this back and forth of, well, we're not sure this is the research needs we have because we haven't had a really clear way in which we engaged community. This has been led to nation, led by the country, state. So to add to you, I think that transparency is super important. I think the governance is really important. And again, I think the reason why it's important is because it's holding large organizations accountable for the things that they are looking to do in collaboration with, you know, countries around the world.
Just to go with the last question. Yeah, look, I mean, I supervise PhD students and a number of other researchers from different places in the Asia Pacific, and they're really keen to do research on corruption and anti-corruption in the countries where they're from. But one of the critical elements of doing that, it's really important that that happens, and there's an increasing number of people that are doing PhDs or doing research on this topic around the world. But one of the key elements of ensuring that those voices are heard and is to understand the power dynamics in the places of where they are conducting their research. So it's the type of research that I do, I think, really highlights for me the importance of having local researchers who understand the context, who are able to talk about these very difficult issues, but are themselves not getting themselves into danger and not facing payback, and are able to keep the powerful accountable at the same time. So I had a PhD student recently, and this speaks to this role of the insider and outsider. I had a PhD student recently doing really interesting research on corruption in Indonesia, and he wanted to go back and do research on the province in which he worked as a government official. And we went through and said, okay, well, maybe this is not a good idea, and we changed the location. And he went in. He's from Indonesia, but he went to a different province, and he was an outsider, right? He's a bit of an outsider to that particular province. And he's done some really great research. But he's called me back recently from the field, said, look, I just had to get out. We were very careful about the types of questions he was asking, about the ethics approval, all that kind of stuff. But the sensitivity around this kind of stuff is really challenging. And what this brings for me is this role of the insider is really important to have local voices, local researchers. But there are sometimes we need a support network, an ongoing support network, and we're trying to develop that at the moment with the type of work I'm doing with research into corruption across the Pacific, working on that now. But we need a support network that's ongoing, that supports people to talk about very politically charged and difficult concepts. And a lot of the type of work that you do in the governance space, even for things like food security, those sorts of things, can be very politically charged. And to ensure there's not only a local network, but a transnational network, I think is really important. And with the pulling back of development, I see that may be less possible into the future. And the other thing I just want to very quickly mention is that there is still a role of the outsider, of people that don't face the same sort of consequences. I can go into different countries, and I do have some privilege. I do have privilege, right? I have privilege, and I can say things. I can write things that I might, I have had, phone calls from the, prime minister's lawyers and things like that, saying, I really prefer you didn't write this, but I'm not subject to the same sort of response as those in those communities are. And really understanding the power dynamic, I think, is really important. I'll leave there. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to leave. Sorry.
No, that's good.
I just wanted to we've got a few minutes before we move on to the next part, but I wanted to see if Dr. Medea Rangi has anything to add as well, given this is a hybrid session.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me. Nod, please.
And we can't hear you at the moment. Just a second. We'll try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Great. Thank you so much. No, it's been excellent. Yes, my name is Dr. Medea Rangi. As Yadira mentioned, I work with Yadira at the Fred Hollows Foundation. And yeah, I think you've covered a lot of the things that that I wanted to touch on, but I do want to highlight that there's questions also coming in the Q&A, and this there was a question around you know, when do we do check-ins, if there's any guidance on that. You know, with this idea, I have answered that, but and I would like others to engage with the question as well if they wish on the online platform. But what I do want to talk about, since that brought it up, is this idea of, you know, engagement with the community, particularly in relation to you know, the question of building sustainable systems, ethical systems, and I think when we think about the community, often what we think is, you know, letting them know of things, and I think that is a problematic attitude that sometimes we get caught up in. I think shifting that mindset to being led by the community is something that we really try and do in our practice at the foundation, and it's not always easy because there has been such strong systems in place for so long of how things have been done, that shifting mindsets personally and then within, you know, the foundation or, you know, other organizations that we work in, I think that's quite challenging. So I think a lot of the work is internal within ourselves, shifting our own mindsets about what that means to work with communities. And once we, you know, question our own perceptions, our own well-developed and well-established ways of thinking and practice, then we can begin to look at things from a new perspective. And I think, yeah, so that's something I would like to add at this point. I don't want to take up too much time.
I just want to, I guess, to the point that you raised also, that was a question about how regularly, you know, is it important to check in? I think it depends on what the thing is you're checking in about. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think people have seen this kind of single loop, double loop, you know, there's only so often you want to question. For example, on an annual level, you might be questioning how well is the partnership going and are we doing the right thing? At a quarterly level, you might be wanting to question, are we delivering what we said we would? Are we working in the manner we said we would? You know, different periods that you might do those things. And I guess one other thing on what you spoke about when we're talking about how much are we drawing from the community, just to recognize that we're all working in very, very different kinds of programs and different social change processes. Some people are working directly with a particular community, others are working nationwide, others are working, so there's lots of different ways of working that we're all engaged in. But to the point about questions, I know some people might have been putting things down, so I wonder, we'd like to open it up now. Just anything you'd like to ask us about what we've said up until this point. We have a little bit of time for that, and then we're going to go into more deep discussion at your table. So,
Mic around. This should be. Quick intro as well.
Oh, right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Palmieri. I'm also at the ANU, full disclosure. And I actually want to engage Grant, who I kind of work with on the question of insiders and outsiders from a university perspective. I think, I mean, I take the point that in a shrinking development budget envelope, and a shrinking or perhaps never very full existent research budget envelope for universities, in politically sensitive research topics, there is always going to be a critical role for university academic research. But in the development space, this is something that we are very cognizant of coming in as experts, and we don't want to do that anymore. And I should say I work in the Department of Pacific Affairs, so all of the kinds of research I do are with collaborators in the Pacific to ensure that there is sustainable research practice. So I very much take Grant's point about building pipelines through PhD students, and I think that's a really important area of work. But having just finished quite a large piece of research on the Parliament of Fiji, which I have to tell you is a pretty contentious political space, and having had to finish that as an outsider by myself, having tried very hard to involve more groups of people who did not want to put their hands up for that research, I landed on the idea of an outsider, as you say, being really important to avoid danger for people who are living in that space. The worst thing that will happen to me is that I get deported and I can't travel to Fiji anymore. It would be tragic, but that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But it also does position me badly, I think. So I have also really drawn on the work of a colleague of mine who is very clever in saying, and I know you will laugh at this, it's not a binary, being an insider or an outside. We are somewhere on a spectrum and we move all the time. I might be an insider in understanding how parliaments work. I'm certainly not an insider in Fiji. And the people that I work with in Fiji are not always insiders in the parliamentary sphere. They kind of know different kinds of political economies around Fiji politics, but they also are able to generate incredible, wonderful data. So the kind of the spectrum here is quite useful for us to understand when there are opportunities to work as equals and when it's actually best to leave it to the kind of the outsider, not because the outsider wants to claim all the glory, but because otherwise the story doesn't get told. That wasn't really a question, it was more just grandstanding.
Appreciate the comment and thanks for sharing. Any other sort of questions or comments?
Look, I'd just say it's kind of the point I guess I was trying to raise, and I was using those terms heuristically, but of course it is on a continuum. I guess that's the example of my student who's from Indonesia. You know, he's at the same time an insider and an outsider. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to comment on the checking back. A couple of decades ago, I did some research on women's empowerment, and the question I asked, and they're all involved with local NGOs, how often do you meet with the NGO? And the question became very interesting because I did some rough and ready stats on it, and I found out that the frequency and whether the meetings were mandated affected women's self-confidence, choices, all that empowering stuff. And so my question is, the checking in, should it be about more than just checking in once a year? Should it be having mandated conversations with whomever? And that's the tricky thing, the with whomever, but more frequently as a way of you being accountable to them and a bit of vice versa. Anyway, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's interesting, you know, within monitoring and evaluation theory, I think some people see monitoring and evaluation as part of the intervention, as part of the social change. It's not just something that sits on the side of social change and checks whether that social change is happening. Rather, even engaging people in asking questions can be powerful. Especially in the cases where people get to tell their own story, recreate their own story. So yes, I'd agree with you that thinking about how often you're monitoring or how often you're evaluating, the kinds of questions you're asking, who you're asking questions of, who gets to ask the questions, should all be considered within the frame of social change, not just sitting alongside social change. Got a bit of wind happening here.
And the door doesn't shut properly.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Gemma, and I'm fortunate to work for as a consultant for a donor who really supports the shift from top-down, accountability-focused monitoring evaluation to a learning-oriented approach, and we work with grassroots organisations supporting them to do that. But through doing that for the last couple of years, I've seen, I think we do tend to sort of romanticise the concept of learning, and what's become really clear is some of the sort of challenges that you identified, Grant, around power, politics, even at the organisational level, and that when we're asking grassroots organisations to sort of go along with this shift, it's still a shift that's being driven by us in the global north, and we're sort of saying, we think this is good for you, and some of you have told us you want it, but, you know, they're sort of shape-shifting to match the latest trend in monitoring and evaluation. Even though I do agree there's very good reasons for it, but we're asking a lot. It requires a lot of resources, changes in organisational structures, different staff capabilities, and they're saying we just don't have time to not. We say we don't tell us the numbers. No, so stop counting numbers. Instead, tell us what you're learning, but it should be based on data. So, and that's just adding additional demands. And so, yeah, I think there's what we're starting to recognise is just to really just be aware of that the difficulties involved in learning. It's not all roses. It's really difficult, and it is still being driven by us. And you mentioned there the importance of having it as a conversation to say, perhaps it's sort of saying, we think learning is important for us, and this is why, because we're trying to change our practices, but, what can it be for you, and where can we find the alignment? Thanks.
A lot of nodding heads for that comment. Anyone from the panel want to respond? Or Medea, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think I'll refer to what I posted on the question there, is that I would say that, for us, there's no universal rule how often you check in, but it's really the right frequency would depend on the purpose. So is this a co-design? Is this monitoring evaluation? Are you problem solving? Is this a learning activity? And I would say that the pace and intensity of work, that will also determine the frequency. I think the other thing that we need to keep in mind is the community preferences and the capacity and for that engagement. A lot of the time we tend to put a lot of burden also on our communities that we work with, and so that's something to keep in mind. And of course, as has been mentioned before, the power dynamics and the trust levels. So I would say, instead of thinking about the frequency, it's really helpful for us to think about guiding principles. So being purposeful, purpose-led, only checking in when there's clear reason, and thinking about consistency more than frequency. So, predictable, transparent contact, which can build trust in the long run as well. Especially with some of the partners that we work with, these can be really long-term partnerships. And so consistency can really go a long way. And another guiding principle would be a blend structured and informal interactions. So of course you would have formal meetings, but what we also find is that our country teams have a lot of informal engagement with partners. And again, that's, they can be really culturally appropriate in certain contexts more than others. And really aligning with community rhythms. And that's something that we're often reminded of by our country teams, saying that we're engaged in such and such events and activities, so really be mindful of that burden. And something that I think you mentioned, Frida, is closing, always closing the loop, feedback loop. So, sharing what will happen next, I think is also really important. Where are we going next? Yeah, it's just some thoughts on that.
Thank you. I think in terms of timing, we might shift now to some discussion. So if we could just go to the slide, we have the 4 questions. So in your table, you can decide which one of the questions you want to focus on, discussing more in depth. And I think the 3 of us will come and be part of your discussion for some of the time. For those people at the back, you could join one of the other tables. We have 20 minutes for this. And towards the end, what we'd like you to focus on is the what next element of the question. So having discussed everything that you have, what do you propose to focus on for that discussion? So choose the one that you'd like to focus on.
Yep, sounds good. And I'll play timekeeper.
The primary focus is discussion. And if there's a group that doesn't know the question and wants to take one that hasn't chosen, just give me a second so I can figure out what that is. point, but like.
Okay. I'm going to call time. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your attention. We're going to go around each of the tables. I think I've dropped into, well, there wasn't a table, but a group at the back, and asked everyone for a nominee to report back on what next in the topic you discussed. So if you can just let us know which question you were sort of focused on, and rather than the summary of what was discussed, what next in what you discussed. And we'll start with Sally here for the first table.
Thank you. So we discussed question 2, and this is just a quick summary of some of the sort of next steps. Well, one of the first ones that came out of our discussion was that there's still quite a lot of silos in work taking place. So there might be a project taking place where it's about one particular topic, and people are saying, no, but we need this done, which is a separate area of interest, and then that's not actually addressed by the project partners. So that then creates distrust, and it doesn't solve the problems that are actually most needed in the community. So I guess, yeah, it's some ways to lowering silos, and then ways that could potentially be done is by doing member checking and identifying the sort of problems more deeply before then going and trying to address them. So having more conversation and understanding of what's actually going on to then be able to address. And an idea was to potentially have PhD students paired with local partners, and to be able to I guess bridge the gap between the outsiders and insiders, and do collaborative research in that way. I think I've missed a few things, but yeah.
It's a very supportive table of their nominee. Who do we have on this table? Yep, great.
I just want to make it clear I wasn't a volunteer. I was definitely told. We looked at question 4 and we had a really fascinating discussion. I think, again, I'm really sorry if I'm paraphrasing badly here, but I think part of the way to navigate this tension is to have different kinds of conversations with the donors, because partner needs, when they are understood, potentially in less quantitative ways and more qualitative ways, through kind of more independent research processes, can then be better explained to donors about what it is that donors really need from a MEL perspective or a learning perspective. We had a really fascinating example about we have colleagues here from the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, who are really great at working with partners and trying to build media capability, I'm going to say in the Pacific, mostly Indo-Pacific. Really appreciate your work in the Pacific. And the donor kind of saying, but we want to know the reach. So they want to know a figure about how well their programs are being listened to or watched, but that's not really helping the program at all. So a more fruitful discussion with that donor would be around what actually is going to be useful, both for the program but also for the donor, rather than this idea that they had from 1972 that reach is the way to find out. And one way we also thought about that is kind of like encouraging flexibility in the way in which programs are designed, and always embedding good open-ended research processes there. Anything else, people? Okay.
I'm going to flip the script a bit. There was a story over here, an anecdotal one, about e-learning and digital libraries. Did you want to share that just after that point there?
Yes. So what was the point again? Yeah, so I'm going to speak tomorrow in a panel with my colleagues on developmental leadership and how everyday leadership plays a part in getting projects done in the communities. And so a lot of what we're discussing here is the problems that we usually face. And I guess I'll just only say one thing that I've learned from my experience with bringing that project back to the village was the fact that they didn't need it. And my problem was to convince them that they needed it. And so I wanted to bring the e-libraries back home. And they said, no, we need spades for the gardens, and we need tools to go diving and fishing. And that's how they sustain their livelihood every day. And how am I going to implement something for the future and be futuristic when they have to survive? And so I think that's the dilemma that especially you say third world countries, but yeah, and also the discussion this morning about how relevant development is and what is development in your eyes when in our eyes, we're still developing as well, but there's a system that already works as well. And so that space surrounding and all of this discussion as well. And it's something I think we can gain from each other as well. I hope I've answered a little bit.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm coming over to this table and
Okay, we also took on question 4 around navigating the tensions between donor expectations, partner needs, and the pursuit of independent, meaningful learning. We had some very similar points that you also raised. So yeah, some parallels in the conversation. We talked a lot about the importance of getting really clear on each other's needs, perceptions, expectations, etc., and where, you know, some of the classic areas in which some of these tensions kind of play out, you know, in terms of project designs, but also in the whole area of partner due diligence and some of the challenges that can throw up in terms of engaging smaller OPDs and women's organisations and things like that. We also talked about the importance of trust and cultural safety and recognising power, inequalities in power. So in terms of what next, very similarly, we thought that it was really important to kind of seek and create spaces where conversations about these differing perceptions and expectations can happen, that it's really important to acknowledge the power differences, and that in order to really have those conversations, it's really important to start to really build cultural safety and trust so that we can actually have those conversations in a frank and open way.
Well done.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think sometimes we can, you know, in a kind of open paradigm, a paradigm that values information and thinks that other people value information, sometimes we can talk quite depolitically, as if, you know, if we just talk about our different positions, then we can resolve our power differences, when actually you can't, right? Somebody's not just going to hand over power, right? And I think that's part of remembering the political process that we're involved in and the need for solidarity in order to kind of make change come about, because it doesn't just come about by itself. So I just think we just always have to put ourselves back in that place where we're recognizing these are really difficult processes that require cooperation, collaboration with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about those roles that we played, not only in hierarchy, but that kind of interlocutor bridge role that we play and should be playing maybe a little more often, in that, back to that inside outside, right? Kind of positioning ourselves, understanding, being aware of where we are in that power relation, but also in kind of in the contribution you can make, right? So being an interlocutor is being able to understand what is going on here and what is going on here, and beginning to bridge the possibility of conversations, right? And it might be just making clear the power dynamics. Yes, it doesn't make them disappear, right? But even being able to kind of call out what's happening, then the next step, which is needed, is like, well, then how do we begin to create a bridge, right? And not only just think that it's going to disappear or turn a blind eye to it. But yeah, that role as interlocutor, that bridge maker is really an important one. Even in the question about present to future, right? What are the present needs and what are the potential future that is being created? And what role are we playing? Are we playing future needs? I don't know, working towards kind of understanding those gaps and opportunities that are here now. And some of us who might be working towards kind of this future state, creating that. And it's an and situation, not a, you know, or without. Yeah.
Who's the nominee down the back here?
Yeah, I was trying to look to Nikki. We chose number 4, and I think it's coming back to your question about the interlocutor, and we talked about champions, and we talked about the collaborations. I think our reflections link to both tables, but we talked about pockets of where some organizations were convening meaningful learning environments, intentional learning, and how you're using evidence to actually inform practice and creating that environment. So I think, and the difference there in those environments was the purposeful designing of that way of working and that agreement between, say, the donor and the organization, where it was captured maybe in a contracting arrangement or a way of working that outlined the expectations, or I think so that each could be held accountable to. So there's a lot of understandings of learning, but what evidence makes learning meaningfully? I come from a local organization in Papua New Guinea. So when I read that question of what makes learning meaningful for my organization, whilst to the stakeholders that I work with, whilst also bringing in the donor as well too, so that it responds to them. So that culture of learning and evidence-driven learning. So I think we talked about some of the points or the examples that were used. There were champions within maybe DFAT who understood and recognized this. And so the way in which contracting happened was different, that allowed and enabled us to work in a way that embraced that. So I think going forward, it's that collaboration of identifying and bringing together these actors to influence how, when we're planning for projects, we intentionally look at how we're doing that. I don't know if I'm correctly reflecting what we said. Yeah, so that was our reflection, like going forward.
Excellent, thank you. And I won't point out the DFAT people who could be champions in this room, but who's here on this side? Thank you.
Thank you. So we spoke to question 2, and we really spoke about participatory approaches and how they're often used as a way to be non-extractive and how they're heralded as such. And we actually talked about the fact that sometimes there are still those power relations within participatory approaches, and that we sometimes have this label and then think, okay, we've done it. And I know that sounds a little bit doom and gloom, which we did reflect on, but we said we think the ways forward from that are actually, in order for us to properly progress, we need to completely dismantle the structures that we're currently following. And I think a lot of those structures do really still promote these constant hierarchies and just label them in different ways. And so instead we need to really think about what we're doing and have some transparency, rather than saying a process can be completely participatory and non-extractive. Instead thinking about where the power lies and acknowledging it and working within those frameworks. And so the hope is that the way forward is when we begin to really understand those processes, we can then think about how to move forward in meaningful ways. I don't know if there was anything else. No? There you go.
Okay, thank you. And Yadira?
I know online we were having a bit of difficulty getting them to do a group engagement. The hybrid system doesn't allow them to speak to each other while we are not speaking to them. So that's interesting. So they can only engage with us. They can't engage, yeah, it's a really poor power dynamic. But opening to the hybrid community, to the online community, and seeing if there's anything, if there's what is there to share. Let me see. Let's see.
We're getting Medea back on. Just one moment. Okay. Medea?
Hi. Yes, I haven't been able to receive anything from the people that are online. I don't know if they can speak. I'd rather that they speak if they can.
Unfortunately, it's a viewing platform, so yeah.
Okay. All right. I have no other questions on here that that I've received so far, other than that first one.
Well, thank you. A bit of a
Apologies to those online. There's about 15, I think. We're almost at time, so I know everyone's sort of given their reflections back from each of the tables, but I'm going to ask each of the panelists to sort of talk to their reflections from this session. I'll start over here with Grant first.
Yeah, look, thanks for that. So, I mean, this was really interesting in light of the presentation this morning. I think about, you know, thinking differently about the way in which development is done and whether or not there needs to be, you know, a radical shift. There was some discussion around the importance of breaking down silos, and I think that, you know, institutionally, academics in particular are very fond. We love them. We love a good silo, and it's very. And we find it very difficult to talk to each other across disciplines, right? And we are incentivized to incentivized not to. So, like, these kinds of spaces I think are very important. The kind of feedback that you're talking about is very important because it's a diverse set of people, and it's a diverse. I think it's quite a diverse panel where we can start those kind of conversations and get those kinds of insights. I guess for me, this was a really exciting opportunity to be a part of something where you know, we're gathering some, you know, ideas, further ideas. We don't have all the answers, of course. We don't have, you know, maybe even the start of them, but to start the conversation about what looks different, how to break down silos, how to have conversations about power relations in very challenging contexts, the role of the insider and outsider, just to use that dichotomy as a shorthand. I think it's been very fascinating conversation. So thank you all.
And I'm going to ask Medea to sort of try and represent online participants, even though they couldn't represent themselves. But yeah, we'll go with Medea next, and then Farida.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess just some thoughts as I sat here by myself on these questions. I guess one of the things that I've just been thinking about in our practice at the foundation is really thinking about those alliances and capabilities and accountabilities that are necessary to protect the integrity of the evidence that we we generate and we want to work with. I think just looking ahead, thinking about new partnerships, because we often really work with agents that we know, and we get really comfortable, and we don't look beyond them. We think, well, if it works, it works. But I feel that if we don't get curious about what more can we do with new agents, new partners, and it can be daunting, but it can also be really exciting. And so I think, though, a lot of that, within the context of where we work in the foundation, we need to put in place frameworks that allows our country teams to be adventurous. And because often a lot of the structural frameworks that are already in place can be really limiting, and can feel like they're so set in stone that we can't shift them, and we can't think outside them. And so I think organizationally, if we can change the way we think about partnership as something set and permanent, and allow for new connections to form, we'd be able to, I think, achieve beyond some of the walls that we're hitting. I think just some reflections there.
Thank you, Maria. I actually will jump off on that one, because I do agree. We have some beautiful legacy, relationships and partnerships that have created a great amount of work. And together, we've reached millions of people. And we also, in this room, we talked about the opportunity and the time needed to create other relationships, ones that may be much closer to communities, or actually represent the shifts in the communities that are happening currently because of political, economic, climate, environment. So in thinking about that, for me, it continues to be an investment in local researchers, in community networks, in civic leaders, in those bridges, those interlocutors, right? Us and the new ones that are emerging. And yes, as researchers, we're very technically based, but also thinking about those capabilities within ourselves, but also in those we work with, that are focused on cultural humility, ethical reflexivity, right? So things that are more about the way we ask questions, about the way that we see the world, inequities that we're able to kind of continuously assess, because they continue to shift, right? So those things are deeply important when we think about the skills needed moving forward, the capabilities moving forward, and the kind of alliances that we want to be fostering in the future, so that it's not leading us down this kind of very extractive, limiting structure that won't be resilient in the constant changing environment we're in.
I guess I've been thinking about partnership a bit too, from the perspective of this really changing environment that we're in, more and more authoritarianism, government leaders who are quite willing to lie. And so thinking about so much of our work around evidence gathering and presumes an evidence-based technocratic order. And I think, and it takes me back to one of this morning's exercises where I think it was Viv was talking about story being at the heart of the way we communicate as human beings. And I guess I really reflect a lot about how important creativity and storytelling and a range of mediums are to really reach and communicate and persuade people. So I just keep remembering the limitations of some of what we do and the way in which it's important to partner with others in order to make a difference in this rapidly changing world. So thanks.
And when the tech person tells you you're over time, you're definitely over time. And I've eaten into your afternoon tea, quite literally, I think. I do want to thank the panelists, Grant, Medea, Yadira, and Farida. But I also want to thank you in the room for being open with your discussion, reflecting on a very multi-layered, complex sort of topic. And I especially want to thank those online who couldn't participate but still tuned in. So thank you very much, and I won't keep you any longer. Lots more to talk about. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and exchange, and look forward to meeting all of you. Thank you.